Elijah Thornton's hands still carried the dirt from his wife's grave when he heard the children screaming at the train station. 7 of them, the oldest clutching the youngest like her life depended on it, and pinned to each of their threadbare coats, paper labels. Troublemaker, defective, wild, mute, strange, worthless, unknown. The townspeople walked past without looking, but Elijah couldn't walk away. Not from those eyes, not from children wearing their rejection like death sentences. If you want to see how one broken man and 7 forgotten children rebuilt what the world tried to destroy, stay with me until the very end. Please subscribe to my channel, hit that like button, and comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can reach. The Wyoming wind cut through Elijah Thornton like a blade made of ice and memory. 4 months. That's how long Sarah had been in the ground. 4 months of waking up to silence so heavy it pressed the air from his lungs. 4 months of reaching across the bed in the darkness, finding nothing but cold sheets and the ghost of lavender that still clung to her pillow. He stood at the kitchen window, coffee gone cold in his hands, staring at nothing. The Thornton Creek Ranch stretched out before him. 500 acres of land that used to mean something. Sarah had planted roses by the porch. They were dead now. She'd hung curtains in every window to make the place feel like home. He hadn't opened them since October. "You're not eating again." The voice came from the doorway. Tom Walker, his deputy badge catching the weak morning light, stood with his hat in his hands. "Don't need a nursemaid, Tom. No, you need a friend who'll tell you the truth." Tom crossed to the stove, poured himself coffee from the pot. "You look like death, Eli. When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours?" Elijah didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The nightmares came every time he closed his eyes. Sarah's face, pale and sweating with fever. Her hand going limp in his. The sound of the dirt hitting the coffin. And before that, the other nightmares. The ones from the war that never really stopped. "There's a reason I came out here," Tom said carefully. "Orphan trains coming through Elkhorn Crossing today." So the Children's Aid Society is looking for families to take them in. Good Christian families, they say. Tom's voice carried something Elijah couldn't quite read. "Thought maybe—" "No." "Eli, I said no." Elijah set down his cup hard enough to crack it. "I can barely keep myself alive, Tom. What in God's name makes you think I could care for a child?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because Sarah would have wanted you to." The name hit like a physical blow. Elijah's hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles going white. "Get out." "Eli, I said get out." Tom left without another word, but his boots had barely cleared the porch when Elijah heard it. The distant wail of a train whistle, cutting through the valley like a cry for help. He told himself he wasn't going to go. Told himself it wasn't his business, wasn't his problem. He had enough ghosts already without adding more. But his hands were already reaching for his coat. The ride to Elkhorn Crossing took an hour. Rust, his buckskin gelding, picked his way along the frozen trail with the patience of an old soldier. Elijah kept his head down, his collar up, trying not to think about why he was doing this. The town emerged from the gray afternoon like a wound in the landscape. 30 buildings, maybe 40. A general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple. And the train station, where a crowd had gathered despite the bitter cold. Elijah tied Rust to the post and walked toward the platform. He heard them before he saw them. "Get your hands off me!" A girl's voice, sharp with fury and fear. "Don't you touch her!" The crowd had formed a loose circle, the way people do when they want to watch something, but don't want to get too close. Elijah pushed through, his height giving him advantage, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. 7 children. The oldest was a girl, maybe 14, with red-brown hair coming loose from its braid and fire in her eyes. She stood with her arms spread wide, shielding the others behind her, like a mother wolf protecting her cubs. A man in a bowler hat. Elijah recognized him as Silas Crenshaw, the richest landowner in the county. Had his hand wrapped around the arm of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 8. "This one looks strong enough," Crenshaw was saying to the woman beside him. "Could use another hand in the mines. The rest are worthless, but this one, he ain't going nowhere without me." The older girl lunged forward, and Crenshaw backhanded her across the face. She hit the ground hard. The smaller children screamed. And something inside Elijah Thornton, something that had been frozen solid since Sarah died, cracked wide open. He moved before he could think about it. 3 long strides and he was there, his hand closing around Crenshaw's wrist with enough force to make the man cry out. "Let him go." Crenshaw's face went red. "Who the hell do you think?" "I think I'm a man who just watched you strike a child." Elijah's voice was quiet, deadly quiet. The voice he'd used in the war when everything was about to go to hell. "And I think if you don't take your hands off that boy right now, you're going to find out exactly what I learned at Antietam." The crowd had gone silent. Crenshaw's eyes darted to the people around him, looking for support, finding none. He released the boy. The child scrambled backward immediately, pressing himself against the older girl who had struggled back to her feet. Her lip was bleeding. Her eyes were locked on Elijah with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "These children are property of the Children's Aid Society," Crenshaw snarled. "You have no right. They ain't property." Elijah turned to face the man fully. "They're children, and unless you got papers saying you've legally adopted that boy, you got no claim to him." "I don't need papers. Nobody wants them anyway." Crenshaw gestured at the children with disgust. "Look at them. The society woman couldn't wait to be rid of them. Said they were nothing but trouble. Unmarriageable, untrainable, unwanted." The word hung in the air like poison. Elijah looked at the children properly for the first time. Really looked. 7 of them, huddled together against the cold. Their clothes were thin and patched, meant for eastern cities, not Wyoming winters. Their faces were hollow with hunger and exhaustion. And pinned to each of their coats, paper labels, written in blocky black letters. The oldest girl. Troublemaker. A dark-haired boy who stood silent as a shadow. Defective. A round-faced girl with blonde curls, maybe 10, trying desperately to smile. Sickly. A smaller boy with a face full of freckles. Wild. A serious-eyed girl of 7 who watched everything with unnatural calm. Strange. A tiny girl of 5, pressed so close to the oldest she might have been trying to disappear into her. Mute. And the smallest, a golden-haired child of 4, clutching a ragged doll. Unknown. Elijah felt something twist in his chest. Something that might have been rage. Might have been grief. Might have been both. "Who put these on them?" His voice came out rough, scraped raw. Crenshaw shrugged. "Society woman. Said it was to help families know what they were getting. Truth in advertising, she called it." Truth. Elijah reached out slowly, giving the oldest girl time to flinch away if she wanted to. She didn't. She held perfectly still, her bleeding lip pressed tight, as he unpinned the paper from her coat. Troublemaker. He crumpled it in his fist. Then he moved to the next child, and the next, removing each label, crushing each lie. Defective. Sickly. Wild. Strange. Mute. Unknown. When he was done, he let the papers fall to the platform. The wind caught them, scattered them like dead leaves. "These children," Elijah said, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear, "are not unwanted." Crenshaw laughed. "Then I suppose you're going to take them? All 7? A bachelor rancher who can barely keep his own stock alive? That's exactly what I'm going to do." The words came out before Elijah could stop them, before he could think about what he was saying, what he was promising. But the moment they left his lips, he knew they were true. The crowd erupted in murmurs. The older girls' eyes went wide. The smaller children pressed closer together, as if afraid to believe what they'd heard. "You're insane," Crenshaw said flatly. "Maybe." Elijah crouched down, bringing himself eye level with the oldest girl. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her young face, the weight of responsibility she'd been carrying for God knew how long. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Her gaze flicked to the children behind her, then back to him. "Grace," she said finally. "Grace Whitmore." "Grace," he repeated it, letting the name settle between them. "I'm Elijah Thornton. I got a ranch about an hour north of here. 500 acres. Big house. Empty rooms." He paused. "Too empty." "Why?" Grace's voice cracked. "Why would you take us? You don't know us. You don't know what they say about us. The things we've done. The trouble we—" "I know what I saw." Elijah kept his voice steady. "I saw a girl ready to fight a grown man to protect her family. I saw children who've been told they're worthless by people who never bothered to look past a piece of paper." He straightened. "I'm not asking you to trust me. Trust takes time. But I'm offering you a roof and beds and food. And I'm offering you a choice." "A choice?" "You can come with me and see if maybe things can be different. Or you can stay here and wait for someone else to decide your future." He held her gaze. "It's up to you, Grace. All of you." Grace turned to look at the children behind her. The silent boy, Sam, his label had said, watched with eyes that saw too much. The blonde girl, Hannah, was crying quiet tears. The freckled boy, Billy, had his fists clenched like he was ready to fight the world. Little Maddie stood perfectly still, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Lucy clung to Grace's coat with both hands, and the smallest one, Abby, had her face buried against Lucy's shoulder. Grace knelt down. She whispered something to each of them, listened to their responses, watched their faces. Then she stood and faced Elijah. "If you hurt any of them," she said quietly, "I will kill you in your sleep." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "Fair enough," Elijah said. The ride back to the ranch was the longest hour of Elijah's life. He'd borrowed a wagon from Clara Henderson at the general store, loading it with blankets and what supplies he could gather on short notice. The children huddled together in the back, wrapped in wool, their breath fogging in the frozen air. Grace sat at the front with him, her back straight as a board, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. She hadn't spoken since they'd left town. "The boy who doesn't talk," Elijah said finally.
"Sam, he mute like the little one?"
"No." Grace's voice was clipped. "He can talk. He just chooses not to." "Why?" "That's his business." Elijah nodded slowly. He understood about keeping secrets, about the things that lived in your chest that you couldn't put into words. "The small one," he tried again. "Abby. Her label said unknown. What does that mean?" Grace's jaw tightened. "Means nobody knows where she came from. She was on the train when it left New York, but she wasn't on the society's list. No papers, no records, nothing. Just a little girl in a blue dress, holding a doll. And you took her in anyway." "What else was I supposed to do? Leave her?" "No." Elijah glanced back at the wagon, at the tangle of small bodies trying to keep warm. You did right. Something in Grace's posture softened, just slightly, but her voice stayed hard. You should know something, Mr. Thornton. Elijah. Mr. Thornton. She emphasized the formality deliberately. We've been through 12 placements in 2 years. 12 families who decided we were too much trouble. Too many mouths to feed. Too wild. Too strange. Too broken. She turned to look at him directly. Every single one of them made promises at the start, and every single one of them broke them. I ain't them. That's what they all said. Elijah didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right to be suspicious, right to guard her heart and the hearts of those children she'd been protecting for so long. All he could do was prove her wrong, one day at a time. The ranch house loomed out of the twilight like a ghost made of wood and memory. Elijah pulled the wagon up to the porch and climbed down. Behind him, he heard small voices stirring, the first sounds he'd heard from most of the children since they'd left the station. This is your place? Billy's voice, full of disbelief. All of it? All of it. It's huge. It's cold, Grace said flatly. Look at the chimney. No smoke. When's the last time you had a fire going? The question stung more than it should have. Elijah didn't answer. He led them inside, and the cold emptiness of the place hit him fresh, the way it always did. The dark hearth, the dishes in the basin, the dust on every surface, the curtains still drawn against a world he hadn't wanted to face. Right. He moved to the fireplace, grabbing kindling, trying to ignore the way 7 pairs of eyes followed his every movement. I'll get this going. Grace, there's a kitchen through that door. Should be some canned goods in the pantry. Sam? The silent boy looked at him with those 2 old eyes. Can you check the barn? There's a horse in the back stall. He'll need water and hay. Sam didn't respond, but after a moment he moved toward the door. I'll help him, Billy announced, already following. Stay together, Grace called after them. Both of you. And be careful. The fire caught. Elijah fed it carefully, coaxing the flames higher until they began to fill the room with warmth and light. He turned to find the remaining children watching him with varying degrees of fear and exhaustion. Hannah had her arm around Maddie. Lucy was pressed against Grace's side, as always. And little Abby. Abby was staring at something on the mantel. Elijah followed her gaze and felt his heart stop. Sarah's photograph. The one from their wedding day. He'd forgotten to put it away, to hide it like he'd hidden everything else that hurt too much to look at. Pretty lady, Abby said softly, the first words she'd spoken. Yes, Elijah's voice came out rough. She was. Where is she? The question, innocent and devastating, hung in the air. He swallowed hard. She's gone, sweetheart. She passed away a few months ago. Abby nodded slowly, processing this with the simple acceptance of the very young. Then she looked up at him with those strange, familiar eyes. My mama went away too, she said. But she said someone would take care of me. She promised. Something about the way she said it, something about her face, the shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head, made Elijah's chest constrict. Abby, he said carefully, do you remember your mama's name? The little girl shook her head. She just called herself Mama. But she had a picture, like that one. She pointed at Sarah's photograph, a picture of a lady who looked just like her. She said it was her sister, said her sister would find me someday. The room went very still. Grace was staring at him, at Abby, back at him. Mr. Thornton, she said slowly. Your wife. Did she have a sister? Elijah couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the small golden-haired child who looked so much like Sarah it made his whole body ache. Yes, he heard himself say. She did. Emily, younger by 3 years. She went to California before we were married. We lost contact when... He stopped. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Emily had written once, years ago, said she'd gotten married, said she was happy, and then silence. Sarah had worried, had wanted to go find her, but the journey was long and expensive, and there was always something else that needed doing first. And now Sarah was gone. And Emily was gone too, apparently. But Emily's daughter was standing in his living room. "Oh God," Elijah breathed. "Oh, dear God." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Food was made, simple beans and cornbread, all Elijah could manage with 7 hungry mouths to feed. Beds were assigned, the 3 older children in what used to be the spare room, the 4 younger ones in Sarah's sewing room, which still smelled faintly of lavender and thread. Grace oversaw everything with military precision. She made sure each child ate, washed their face, changed into one of the clean nightshirts Clara Henderson had pressed into Elijah's hands before he left town. She checked the blankets on every bed, the windows, the doors, and all the while her eyes kept returning to Abby. "You really think she's your wife's niece?" Grace asked when the younger children had finally settled. They stood in the hallway, voices low. Sam had returned from the barn and was sitting in the kitchen with Billy, neither of them speaking, but somehow communicating in the way only children could. "I think..." Elijah ran a hand through his hair. "I think there's too much coincidence for it not to mean something. The way she looks, what she said about her mother having a sister. The age would be right if Emily had a child right after we lost contact. That doesn't make sense." Grace's brow furrowed. If this Emily knew she had a sister in Wyoming, why didn't she send Abby here directly? Why put her on an orphan train with no papers, no identification? Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she was sick or in trouble. Maybe she thought putting Abby on the train was the only way to keep her safe. Safe from what? Elijah didn't have an answer. "We need to find out," Grace said. "We need to know for sure, for Abby's sake." "Agreed." Elijah met her eyes. "I'll write to the society first thing tomorrow. See if there's any record of where she came from, who put her on that train." Grace nodded slowly. Then, for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain, young, like the 14-year-old girl she actually was, instead of the hardened survivor she'd been forced to become. "Mr. Thornton?" "Elijah." She ignored the correction. "What happens if it turns out she is your wife's niece? Does that mean you'll keep her? Just her?" The question cut deep, because he understood what she was really asking. What about the rest of us? "Grace." He waited until she looked at him. "I didn't bring you all here because of blood. I brought you here because you needed a home, and I had one to give. That doesn't change based on who's related to who." "But..." "No buts. You're all here. You're all staying. Unless you decide you don't want to." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie, the catch, the moment when the promise would break like all the others. She didn't find it. "We'll see," she said finally, and walked away to check on the children one more time. Elijah stood alone in the hallway, listening to the creak of floorboards, the whisper of small voices, the sound of a house that wasn't empty anymore. He thought about Sarah, about the children she'd wanted and never had, about the way she would have loved these 7 broken, beautiful, resilient kids. And he made a promise, not out loud, but in the deepest part of his heart, where promises actually meant something. "I'll take care of them, Sarah. All of them. I'll do right by them if it's the last thing I do." The wind howled outside, bitter and cold. But inside, the fire burned steady and warm. And for the first time in 4 months, Elijah Thornton had a reason to keep it burning. He found sleep that night, fitful and shallow, but sleep nonetheless. And in his dreams, Sarah smiled at him from somewhere far away, and 7 children ran laughing through a garden full of roses that hadn't died after all. The first morning came too soon. Elijah woke to the sound of breaking glass and a child's scream. He was out of bed and down the hall before his eyes fully opened, his heart pounding with the old war instincts that never really went away. Billy stood in the kitchen, frozen, a shattered jar of preserves at his feet, and red jam spreading across the floorboards like blood.
I didn't mean to,
The boy whispered, his freckled face gone white.
I was just hungry. I didn't mean to. Please don't.
He flinched backward, arms coming up to shield his head. Elijah stopped cold. He recognized that flinch, had seen it in soldiers who'd been beaten by their commanding officers, in horses broken by cruel hands. Billy. He kept his voice low and even. Look at me. The boy's arms stayed up. Billy, I'm not going to hit you. I need you to hear that. I'm not going to hit you. Slowly, so slowly, Billy lowered his arms. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. Elijah suspected this was a boy who'd learned a long time ago that crying made things worse. It was an accident, Elijah said. Accidents happen, you understand? Billy nodded, still tense as a coiled spring. Now, you said you were hungry? Another nod. Then let's get you fed proper. But first, we need to clean this up. You know where the broom is?
No, sir.
Pantry, left side. Go on and fetch it. Billy moved like he expected a blow to come the moment his back was turned. But when none came, when he returned with the broom and found Elijah already kneeling to pick up the larger pieces of glass, something in his rigid shoulders eased just a fraction. They cleaned the mess together in silence, and when it was done, Elijah made breakfast: eggs, bacon, biscuits from a recipe Sarah had taught him years ago that he hadn't made since she died. The smell brought the others. Grace appeared first, her hair loose and wild from sleep, her eyes sharp as she assessed the situation. Then Sam, silent as always, sliding into a chair without a word. Hannah came next, yawning, with Maddie and Lucy following close behind. Abby was last, clutching her ragged doll, her golden hair tangled. 7 children at his kitchen table. 7 faces turned toward him with varying degrees of suspicion and hope. Eat, Elijah said, setting plates down. We got a lot of work to do today. Grace's eyes narrowed. What kind of work? Ranch work. Animals need tending. Fences need mending. Place has gone to hell while I've been... He stopped himself. While I've been away. You mean while you've been grieving, Maddie said quietly. Her dark eyes were far too knowing for a 7-year-old. It's all right to say it. God understands grief. He made us capable of it so we would know the value of what we've lost. The table went silent. Elijah stared at the small, serious girl who spoke like a preacher twice her age. That's a wise thing to say, Maddie. My papa used to say it. He was a minister. Her voice didn't waver. Before the bad men killed him and Mama on the road. Hannah let out a small sound of distress. Grace reached over and put her hand on Maddie's shoulder. The little girl didn't seem to need the comfort. She'd stated the fact with the same calm she might use to describe the weather. But she accepted it anyway. I'm sorry, Elijah said, for what happened to your parents. It was God's will, Maddie replied. I don't understand it yet, but I will someday. Billy snorted. God's will. If God wanted to do something useful, maybe he should have stopped those men instead of letting them... That's enough, Grace cut in sharply. We don't talk about that. Why not? It happened. Pretending it didn't.
I said that's enough.
The tension in the room spiked. Elijah could feel it. The old wounds pressing against thin scars, threatening to break open. Eat your breakfast, he said firmly. All of you. We can talk about God and what he does or doesn't do later. Right now, food, then work. Billy scowled, but returned to his eggs. Maddie bowed her head in what might have been prayer, and Grace watched Elijah with those assessing eyes, measuring him against some internal standard he couldn't see. He wondered if he was passing or failing. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Elijah assigned tasks based on what he'd observed the night before. Sam and Billy would help with the horses. Sam because he moved like someone who understood animals. Billy because the boy clearly needed physical outlet for the energy that crackled through him like lightning. Grace would manage the house with Hannah's help. The older girl had clearly been doing this for years, keeping the younger ones fed and clothed and alive. Elijah wasn't about to take that role from her. Maddie would organize the pantry. Her methodical nature seemed suited to it, and Lucy and Abby would stay close to Grace, because Lucy wouldn't let go of the older girl's hand, and Abby was too young for real work anyway. "You're giving us chores," Grace said when he finished explaining. It wasn't a question. "I'm giving you responsibilities. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Chores are what you make children do to keep them busy. Responsibilities are what you'd give people you're counting on to help." Elijah met her gaze steadily. "I need help, Grace. This ranch is too much for one man. I thought I could manage it alone, but I was wrong. So yes, I'm asking all of you to work. But I'm not asking you to do anything I won't do myself. And I'm not asking you to do it without reward." "Reward?" "Room and board, for starters. Education. I'll teach you all to read and write proper, those who don't know already. And when you're old enough, if you want to stay and work the ranch for real, I'll pay you fair wages, same as any hand." Grace's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. "Nobody's ever offered us wages before," she said slowly. "Most families we stayed with treated us like free labor, work us till we dropped, then throw us out when we got too troublesome." "I ain't most families." "No." She studied him for a long moment. "I'm starting to see that." She turned and headed for the kitchen, calling for Hannah to follow. And Elijah allowed himself a small breath of relief. One conversation at a time, one moment at a time. That was how trust got built. The barn was cold but dry, and the animals were restless after a night without proper attention. Elijah walked Sam and Billy through the morning routine, watering the horses, mucking the stalls, laying fresh hay. Sam moved with quiet competence, like he'd done this before, though he never said a word. Billy threw himself into the work with reckless energy, talking constantly to fill the silence his companion wouldn't. "So this is your horse, Rust? That's a good name. He's big. Is he fast? I bet he's fast. I used to know a guy who had a horse, but it wasn't this big. It was more like a pony, really. You ever ridden a pony? Ponies are mean. Meaner than big horses. At least that's what I heard. Hey, Sam, you ever ridden a pony?" Sam shook his head, a ghost of amusement crossing his face. "Yeah, me neither. But I want to learn to ride a real horse, a big one like this. You think Mr. Thornton would teach me? You think—" "Billy." Elijah's voice cut through the chatter. "Breathe." The boy stopped, looking almost guilty. "Sorry, I talk too much. Everyone says so. The lady at the orphanage said my mouth was going to get me killed someday. Said nobody wants a boy who won't shut up." "She was wrong." Billy blinked. "She was?" Talking isn't a sin, and being curious isn't a character flaw. Elijah hefted a bale of hay. But there's a time for words and a time for work. Right now, we work. Save the questions for supper. You'll answer them? At supper? If I can. Billy's whole face lit up. It was such a pure expression of hope that Elijah had to look away, his chest tight. How long had it been since anyone promised this boy anything? How many times had those promises been broken? Sam, who had been watching the exchange with those two perceptive eyes, moved closer to Billy. Not touching him, not speaking, but present. Supportive. These children protected each other, Elijah realized. They were a unit, a family forged not by blood, but by shared suffering. Each one had a role. Grace the leader, Sam the silent guardian, Hannah the peacemaker, Billy the lightning rod, Maddie the old soul, Lucy the shadow, Abby the innocent. They'd survived by clinging to each other when the world tried to tear them apart. And now it was Elijah's job to make sure they never had to cling so desperately again. Midday brought unexpected visitors. Elijah heard the horses first, 3 of them approaching at a steady trot. He set down the fence post he'd been working on and walked to the front of the house, one hand resting casually near his hip where his revolver hung. Silas Crenshaw sat astride a black stallion, flanked by 2 men Elijah didn't recognize. Ranch hands, from the look of them, with the hard eyes of men who followed orders without asking questions. Thornton. Crenshaw's voice carried the oily smoothness of a man used to getting what he wanted. We need to talk. So talk. Crenshaw dismounted, brushing dust from his expensive coat. I've been thinking about our conversation at the station yesterday. I may have been hasty. Those children are mine now. Are you certain about that? Crenshaw smiled, showing too many teeth. You're a widower, Thornton. No wife, no family, no one to vouch for your character. The territorial court takes a dim view of single men trying to raise children, especially 7 of them, especially children who've already been labeled as problematic. Those labels were lies, and you know it. Do I? Crenshaw spread his hands in the gesture of false innocence. I know what I saw. A girl who attacked me in public. A boy who refuses to speak. A child so strange that other children won't go near her. These aren't normal children, Thornton. They're damaged goods. Elijah felt the old anger rising, the same anger that had carried him through the war, through the dark years after. He forced it down. What do you want, Crenshaw? Straight to business. I respect that. Crenshaw moved closer, lowering his voice. Here's my offer. You give me the 2 boys. They're strong enough to be useful, and I'll forget about the assault yesterday. I'll even throw in a good word with the territorial authorities when they come asking questions about your little experiment. No. Think carefully, Thornton. You're one man against the weight of the law. I have friends in the territorial government. Friends who would be very interested to hear that an unstable war veteran with no experience raising children has taken in 7 orphans without proper authorization. I have authorization. Papers filed with the court in Laramie. Crenshaw's smile faltered, just for a moment. Papers can be challenged, especially when there are concerns about the welfare of the children involved. Is that a threat? It's a friendly warning. Crenshaw remounted his horse. I'm a patient man, Thornton. I can wait. But those children would be better off with families who know how to handle them. Families who can give them discipline, structure, purpose. Like working in your mines? Like contributing to society instead of being a burden on it. Crenshaw gathered his reins. Think about my offer. I'll be back. He rode away, his men following. Elijah watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to find Grace standing on the porch. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. He's going to try to take us. He's going to try.
The families who got rid of us before, some of them were paid. By men like him. Men who wanted workers, not children.
Grace's hands were clenched at her sides.
He'll find a way. They always do.
Not this time.
How can you know that? Elijah walked toward her, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps.
Because I've faced men like Crenshaw before. In the war, in business, in every town I've ever lived in. Men who think they can take what they want just because they have money and power.
And
they all made the same mistake. They assume that because I'm quiet, I'm weak. Because I don't make threats, I won't fight back. He held her gaze. I will fight back, Grace. For all of you.
To my last breath, if that's what it takes.
Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. That would take longer. But something close to it. Recognition, maybe, of a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to protect the people who depended on you.
the others are scared, she said quietly. Lucy heard the horses and started crying. Abby's hiding under the bed. Even Sam looks worried, and he never looks worried.
Gather them up. All of them. We're going to have a family meeting. The word family hung in the air between them. Grace's eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded and went inside. 7 children sat in the living room, arranged in their usual protective formation. Grace at the center, the others clustered around her like planets orbiting a sun. Elijah stood by the fireplace, feeling the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "The man who came here today, Crenshaw, he wants to take some of you away, maybe all of you. He thinks because he's rich and powerful, he can do whatever he wants." Billy's jaw tightened. "Let him try. You'll do nothing, except stay close to this house and your brothers and sisters." Elijah's voice was firm, but not harsh. "This isn't your fight, Billy. It's mine." "But no buts. I'm the adult here. It's my job to protect you. Your job is to trust that I can." Trust. Grace's voice was bitter. "We've trusted adults before. It never ends well." "I know." Elijah crouched down, bringing himself closer to their level. "I know you've been let down. I know every promise that's ever been made to you has been broken. I know you've got no reason to believe me when I say I'm different." He paused, looking at each face in turn. Sam's guarded watchfulness, Hannah's hopeful fear, Maddie's eerie calm, Billy's coiled tension, Lucy's silent terror, Abby's wide-eyed confusion, and Grace. Grace who carried all of them on her thin shoulders.
"But I'm asking you to give me a chance," Elijah continued. "Not forever, just for now. Just long enough for me to prove that I mean what I say. Can you do that?"
Silence. Then Abby slid off her chair and padded toward him, her ragged doll dangling from one hand. She stopped directly in front of him and looked up with those familiar blue-gray eyes.
"The pretty lady in the picture," she said. "Was she nice?"
Elijah's throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. She was very nice."
"She looks like my mama." Abby reached out and put her small hand on his cheek. "Mama said to trust the people who have kind eyes. You have kind eyes. Sad, but kind."
"Abby," Grace started forward, but Elijah held up a hand. "It's all right." He covered Abby's small hand with his own. "Thank you, Abby. That means more than you know." The little girl smiled, a real smile, bright and trusting, then turned and climbed into his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elijah froze. He hadn't held a child since... Abby settled against his chest with a small sigh of contentment, and something that had been locked tight inside him for months cracked open just a little bit more.
"Well,"
Hannah said softly,
I guess that settles it.
Settles what? Billy demanded. Abby likes him. Abby's never wrong about people. That's not, she's right. Maddie's calm voice cut through the argument. The Lord speaks through the innocent.
If Abby trusts him, there's a reason.
Grace was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Her gaze moved from Abby, curled trustingly in Elijah's lap, to his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have been enough.
Fine, she said quietly. We'll give you a chance. But if you hurt any of them,
you'll kill me in my sleep. I remember. The ghost of a smile crossed her face.
Good. Don't forget it.
That night, after the children had gone to bed, Elijah sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and Sarah's photograph. "You'd know what to do," he said softly. "You always knew what to do with people, how to make them feel safe, how to help them heal." The photograph didn't answer. Sarah's smile remained frozen, unchanged. "I think the little one might be Emily's daughter. I think she might be your niece, Sarah, your blood, the family we always wanted." He touched the glass gently.
I'll take care of her. All of them, I promise. A floorboard creaked. Elijah looked up to find Sam standing in the doorway, silent as a ghost. They stared at each other for a long moment. The boy who wouldn't speak, and the man who'd spoken too little for months. Then Sam moved to the table and sat down across from Elijah. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence was a statement all its own. "I'm watching you. I'm waiting to see who you really are." Elijah nodded slowly. "You want some coffee?" Sam considered this, then shook his head. "Smart boy. Stuff'll stunt your growth." Elijah took a sip of his own. "You don't have to trust me, Sam. Not yet. But I hope someday you will." Sam's expression didn't change. But he didn't leave either. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, the fire crackling softly, the wind whispering outside. Two wounded souls, keeping watch over a house full of sleeping children. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a start. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings began before dawn, with Elijah stoking the fire and starting breakfast while the children slowly emerged from their rooms. Grace was always first, followed by Sam, then the others in a gradual trickle. Billy's energy seemed limitless. He attacked every task with fierce determination, as if proving his worth would somehow make him impossible to abandon. Elijah had to remind him constantly to slow down, to be careful, to rest. "I don't need rest," Billy insisted, after nearly running headfirst into a fence post. "I'm not tired. Your body says different." Elijah caught the boy's arm and steered him toward the porch. "Sit, drink some water. Then you can go back to work." "But that's not a request." Billy sat, scowling. But when Elijah brought him a cup of water, the boy drank it all without protest. "Nobody ever made me stop before," Billy said quietly. "At the other places, they just let me work until I collapsed. Then they'd get mad that I wasn't useful anymore. That's not how things work here." "Why not?" "Because you're a child, Billy, not a machine. You need rest, food, and time to just be a kid. That's not weakness. That's being human." Billy stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Maybe, to this boy who'd been treated like disposable labor his whole life, he was. Hannah proved to be a natural mediator. When tensions rose between the children, and they rose often, 7 traumatized kids crammed into close quarters, she was the one who smoothed things over with gentle words and patient listening. "Maddie doesn't mean to be creepy," Hannah explained to Billy after one particularly tense confrontation. "She just sees the world differently. The things she says about God and fate, that's how she makes sense of what happened to her." "It's weird." "So, you talk constantly and climb everything in sight. That's weird too." "That's not—" Billy stopped, thought about it. "Okay,
Maybe it's a little weird. We're all a little weird, Billy. That's what makes us family. The word landed differently now than it had before. Family. Not just a group of orphans clinging together for survival, but something more. Something they were building together, piece by piece. Lucy remained the biggest challenge. The 5-year-old hadn't spoken a word since arriving at the ranch. She clung to Grace like a shadow, her eyes tracking every movement, every sound, with constant vigilance. Elijah tried to coax her out of her shell, offering treats, speaking gently, keeping his distance when she seemed overwhelmed. Nothing worked. Lucy watched him with those huge gray eyes and remained stubbornly silent. "She spoke before," Grace told him one evening, when the younger children were in bed. "Before the orphanage. I remember her talking, singing even. But something happened. I don't know what. By the time I found her, she'd stopped." "Found her? She's not my blood sister. None of them are, except—" Grace stopped abruptly. "Except who?" Grace's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. What matters is Lucy. She needs help I can't give her. Professional help. A doctor who specializes in children like her." "There's a doctor in Laramie. I'll take her there as soon as the weather clears." Grace looked at him sharply. "You'd do that? It would cost money. Time away from the ranch." "She's my responsibility now. All of you are. Whatever you need, I'll find a way to provide it." Something in Grace's expression shifted, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much? You didn't ask for this. We were strangers a week ago." "Burdens dropped on your doorstep by a world that didn't want us." Elijah was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I was young," he said finally, "there was a man in my town. Mean as a snake, everyone said. Never smiled, never talked to anyone. Kids used to dare each other to run past his house." "What happened to him?" "He died, and when they cleaned out his place, they found journals. Hundreds of them, full of poetry and drawings and these incredible stories he'd written. Turns out he'd lost his whole family in a fire when he was young. Lost everything. And instead of reaching out for help, he'd just closed off. Let the world think he was mean, because it was easier than admitting he was broken." Elijah met Grace's eyes. "I don't want to be that man. Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to be that man. When I saw you all on that platform, labeled and discarded like you were nothing, I saw a chance to be something different. Someone who opens doors instead of closing them." "That's a nice story," Grace said, but her voice had lost its edge. "It's the truth." She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Maybe it is. Maybe you really are different." A pause. "I hope so. For all our sakes." She went to bed, leaving Elijah alone with the fire and his thoughts. He'd meant every word, but meaning it and doing it were two different things. Tomorrow, Crenshaw would still be out there, scheming. The territorial authorities would still be watching. 100 different things could go wrong. But for tonight, 7 children were sleeping safely under his roof. 7 children who'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as they'd learned to expect. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. The letter arrived on the 8th day. Elijah recognized the official seal immediately. Children's Aid Society of New York. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "Dear Mr. Thornton, regarding your inquiry about the child known as Abby, our records indicate that a female child matching your description was placed on the westbound orphan train in November of this year. She was brought to our offices by a woman who identified herself as Emily Whitfield, née Thornton, of San Francisco, California. Mrs. Whitfield was gravely ill at the time of surrender. She provided no documentation for the child, except a brief note stating that the girl's name was Abigail and requesting that she be placed with a good family. Mrs. Whitfield passed away 2 days later at St. Mary's Hospital. She is buried in an unmarked grave at the city cemetery. We were unable to locate any relatives of Mrs. Whitfield or the child. The girl was therefore placed in the orphan train program per standard procedure. If you have information regarding the child's family connections, please contact our offices at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Harold J. Pemberton, Director, Children's Aid Society. Elijah read the letter 3 times. His hands shook harder with each reading. Emily, Sarah's baby sister, the one who'd gone west to find her fortune and found only death. And Abby, little golden-haired Abby, was her daughter, Sarah's niece, the only family he had left in the world. He didn't realize he was crying until a small hand tugged at his sleeve. Abby stood there, looking up at him with concern in her familiar eyes. "Why are you sad?" Elijah knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm happy." "You're crying." Sometimes people cry when they're happy, when they find something they thought was lost forever. Abby considered this with the seriousness of the very young. "Like when I found Rosie?" She held up her ragged doll. "I lost her once, on the train, and when I found her again, I cried too." "Yes," Elijah's voice cracked. "Exactly like that." "What did you find?" He looked at this child, this miracle, who had been delivered to him through tragedy and coincidence and something that might have been grace. "You," he said softly. "I found you, Abby. I found family." Abby smiled, that bright, trusting smile that broke his heart and healed it at the same time. "Good. I was hoping you'd find me. Mama said you would." She hugged him then, her small arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. And Elijah held her close, this gift from his dead wife's dead sister, and let himself believe that maybe God was paying attention after all. Grace found him still kneeling on the kitchen floor, Abby wrapped in his arms, the letter crumpled in his fist. "What happened?" Her voice was sharp, ready for danger. "What's wrong?" Elijah looked up at her, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop cold. "She's Sarah's niece," he said hoarsely. "Abby. She's my wife's blood. Her sister Emily. She died in New York. Alone. Sick. She put Abby on that train hoping someone would find her, take care of her." Grace's eyes moved to the little girl, still clinging to Elijah's neck. "You're sure?" The society confirmed it. Emily Whitfield, née Thornton. It's all here. He held up the letter with trembling fingers. "Sarah wanted children so badly. We tried for years. And now her sister's daughter is here." Grace's voice softened in a way Elijah had never heard before. "That's not coincidence. That's fate." "Maddie would say it's God's will." "Maybe Maddie's right." Abby pulled back from Elijah's embrace, looking between the two adults with curious eyes. "Why is everyone acting funny?" "Because we just found out something important," Grace said, kneeling down beside them. "Something good." "What?" Grace looked at Elijah. He nodded. "Mr. Thornton's wife," Grace said gently, "was your mama's sister. That means he's your uncle, Abby. Your real family." Abby's face scrunched up in concentration. Like a papa?" The question hung in the air. Elijah felt his heart stutter. "If you want," he managed. "Only if you want." Abby considered this with the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict. Then she reached out and touched his face again, the way she had on that first night.
Mama said family would find me. She said to wait and be brave, and family would come. Abby smiled. You came.
Elijah pulled her close again, burying his face in her golden hair so the others wouldn't see the tears streaming down his cheeks. Grace stood quietly, giving them the moment. But when Elijah finally composed himself, he saw something new in her expression. Not just acceptance, but understanding.
You really aren't going to give us up, she said.
It wasn't a question this time. Never. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. But at the doorway, she paused.
The others need to know about Abby, about what she is to you.
I'll tell them, tonight at supper.
Good.
A hesitation.
And Elijah?
It was the first time she'd used his given name. Thank you. For not making this about blood. For not choosing her over the rest of us. You're all my children now, Grace. Every single one of you. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. She didn't respond, but as she walked away, Elijah could have sworn he saw her wipe her eyes. The news spread through the household like wildfire. Billy's reaction was immediate and loud. So, Abby's actually related to you? Like, for real? That's incredible.
Does that mean she gets to stay forever? Do we all get to stay forever? Are we all related now?
We're not related by blood, Elijah said patiently. But we're family. There's a difference.
What's the difference?
Blood is something you're born with. Family is something you choose. Billy thought about this, his perpetual energy momentarily stilled.
So you chose us? All of us?
I did.
Even me? Even though I'm wild and I talk too much and I break things?
Especially you, Billy. The boy's face crumpled. For a moment, Elijah thought he was going to cry. But Billy was too practiced at hiding weakness for that. Instead, he launched himself at Elijah in a fierce hug that nearly knocked them both over.
I never got chosen before,
Billy whispered into his shirt.
Not once.
Elijah wrapped his arms around the trembling boy. You're chosen now, and that's not going to change. Hannah and Maddie took the news with quiet acceptance. Hannah smiled her gentle smile and said she'd known all along that Abby was special. Maddie nodded solemnly and announced that the Lord worked in mysterious ways, which surprised no one. Lucy, as always, said nothing. But when Abby toddled over to show her the crumpled letter, not understanding what it said but knowing it was important, Lucy reached out and touched her golden curls with something like wonder. Sam was the last to react. He'd been standing in the corner throughout the conversation, watching with those unreadable eyes. When the others had asked their questions and shared their feelings and settled back into the rhythm of the evening, he moved toward Elijah. They stood face to face in the flickering firelight, man and boy, survivor and survivor. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He held it out to Elijah, palm up. A chess piece, a white knight, carved from bone, worn smooth by years of handling. It was my father's, Sam said. His voice was rusty from disuse, barely above a whisper. But it was the first time Elijah had heard it. Sam? He gave it to me before he died. Told me to give it to someone I trusted. Sam's eyes met Elijah's directly. I trust you. Elijah took the chess piece carefully, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the weight of what it represented. This boy who'd been silent for so long, who'd watched and waited and judged, had finally found something worth breaking his silence for. I'll take care of it, Elijah said. And I'll take care of you, I promise. Sam nodded once. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Grace, who had witnessed the exchange from across the room, caught Elijah's eye. She looked as shocked as he felt.
He hasn't spoken in 2 years, she said quietly when Sam was out of earshot. Not since...
Since what? Grace's jaw tightened. Since he saw his mother killed, right in front of him. He was 10 years old. The horror of it hit Elijah like a physical blow. God. He tried to stop it, tried to save her, but he was too small, too young. Grace's voice was flat, reciting facts to keep the emotion at bay. They found him 3 days later, still sitting beside her body. He hasn't said a word since. Until now. Elijah looked down at the chess piece in his hand. Such a small thing to carry such enormous meaning. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" "I don't know." Grace shook her head slowly. "But whatever you're doing, whatever you're giving us that we've never had before, don't stop." "I won't." "Promise me." "I promise." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for doubt, for hesitation. Finding none, she nodded. "Then maybe we really can be a family. All of us." The peace lasted 3 more days. On the 4th morning, Elijah woke to the sound of horses approaching fast. Too fast for a friendly visit. He was dressed and armed before the riders crested the hill. Crenshaw again, but this time he wasn't alone. 6 men rode with him, including 2 wearing badges. Behind them came a wagon, driven by a severe-looking woman in black. Grace appeared at his side, her face pale but determined. "That's Mrs. Harwick, from the Children's Aid Society. She was on the train with us." "She the one who put those labels on you?" "Yes." Elijah felt his jaw tighten. "Get the children inside, all of them. Don't let them come out no matter what." "Elijah!" "Now, Grace!" She ran. Elijah walked out to meet the approaching riders, positioning himself between them and the house. His hand rested on his revolver, casual but unmistakable. Crenshaw dismounted with theatrical grace. "Mr. Thornton, I did warn you I'd be back." "You did. I told you not to bother." "And yet, here we are." Crenshaw gestured to the badges men. "Deputy Marshal Hawkins and Deputy Marshal Reed, territorial jurisdiction. They're here to conduct an official inspection of your living situation." "On whose authority?" "On the authority of the Children's Aid Society of New York." Mrs. Harwick descended from her wagon, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "I've received reports that you've taken custody of 7 children without proper authorization." "Children who are wards of our organization. I have authorization. Papers filed with the territorial court in Laramie." "Papers filed," Mrs. Harwick sniffed, "are not papers approved. There's a process, Mr. Thornton. Background investigations, character references, home inspections. You've bypassed all of it. I bypassed nothing. I took in children who were abandoned on a train platform in the middle of December. Children your organization had labeled and discarded, like damaged merchandise. Labeled according to behavioral assessments conducted by trained professionals, labeled with words like defective and unwanted by people who never bothered to learn their names." Elijah's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. "I've seen what those labels do, Mrs. Harwick. I've seen how children carry them like weights around their necks. You didn't assess those children. You condemned them." Mrs. Harwick's face flushed. "How dare you?" "Enough." Deputy Marshal Hawkins stepped forward, his weathered face neutral, but not unkind. "Mr. Thornton, we're not here to take the children. Not yet. We're here to assess the situation. If everything's in order, you've got nothing to worry about." "And if it's not?" "Then we'll have a conversation about next steps." Hawkins met his eyes steadily. "I've got children of my own, Mr. Thornton. I don't take them away from good homes. But I need to see for myself that this is a good home." Elijah studied the man, looking for deceit, finding only duty.
He was the kind of lawman who followed the rules because he believed in them, not because he was paid to. "Fine," Elijah said finally. "You can look, but Crenshaw stays outside." Crenshaw sputtered. "Now see here. This is my property. You've got no legal right to be here without my permission, and I'm not giving it." Elijah turned to Hawkins. "That a problem?" The deputy marshal glanced at Crenshaw, then shook his head. "Mr. Crenshaw is a concerned citizen who brought this matter to our attention. His presence inside isn't required." Crenshaw's face went red with fury, but he had no grounds to argue. He retreated to his horse, fuming. Elijah led Hawkins, Reed, and Mrs. Harwick into the house. The children were gathered in the living room, exactly as he told Grace to arrange them. 7 faces turned toward the intruders with varying degrees of fear and defiance. Grace stood at the front, chin lifted, eyes blazing. Behind her, Sam had positioned himself protectively near the younger children. Billy's fists were clenched. Hannah had her arms around Maddie and Lucy. Abby clutched her doll and watched with wide eyes. Mrs. Harwick's gaze swept over them with clinical detachment. "I see they're all present. Good. I'll need to interview each of them individually." "No!" Grace's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You don't get to separate us. You don't get to take us into rooms alone and ask us questions designed to make us say what you want to hear." Grace stepped forward, trembling with anger. "I know how this works. You did it at the orphanage. You did it on the train. You twist things until the truth doesn't matter anymore." "Young lady." "My name is Grace. Not young lady, not troublemaker. Grace." Mrs. Harwick's face tightened. "This is exactly the kind of defiance I documented in my reports. This child has a history of—" "This child," Elijah interrupted, "has a history of protecting her family when adults failed to do so. That's not defiance. That's courage. You're romanticizing dysfunction, Mr. Thornton, and you're pathologizing survival." He moved to stand beside Grace, a united front. "You want to interview the children? Fine. But you do it here, in front of me, where everyone can hear the questions and the answers. That's the deal." Hawkins looked between them, then nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable, Mrs. Harwick." "It's highly irregular." "So is labeling children as defective." Hawkins's voice held an edge. "Ask your questions. Let's get this done." The interviews that followed were tense. Each question a potential trap. Each answer a tightrope walk. Mrs. Harwick asked about sleeping arrangements, about food, about work expectations, about discipline. "Has Mr. Thornton ever struck you?" she asked Billy. "No, ma'am." "Raised his voice in anger?" "Only when I was about to do something stupid that would have gotten me hurt. That's not anger. That's caring." "Has he made any of you work beyond your physical capabilities?" "He makes us rest when we're tired," Hannah answered softly. "Even when we don't want to. He says children aren't machines." "Has he ever touched any of you inappropriately?" Grace's face went white with rage. "How dare you?" "It's a standard question." "It's an insult." Grace's voice shook. "Elijah Thornton is the first adult who's ever treated us like human beings instead of problems to be solved. He teaches us. He feeds us. He stays up at night when we have nightmares. He's never once made any of us feel unsafe." The record shows that Mr. Thornton is a war veteran with documented instances of violent behavior. "The war was 15 years ago," Elijah cut in. "And the violence was in service of my country, against enemies who were trying to kill me. I've never raised a hand against a child. Never will. Can you prove that? Can you prove otherwise?" Silence. Hawkins cleared his throat. "I've seen enough, Mrs. Harwick. The children are healthy, well-fed, properly clothed. The house is clean and warm. There's no evidence of abuse or neglect. The paperwork can be sorted out through proper channels. These children don't need to be removed while that happens. Mrs. Harwick's mouth pressed into a hard line. This isn't over, Mr. Thornton. The society has standards, requirements. You may have fooled these deputies with your rustic charm, but the territorial board will want a more thorough investigation. Then investigate. I've got nothing to hide. We'll see about that. She swept out of the house, Deputy Reed following. Hawkins lingered. You've made an enemy, he said quietly. Mrs. Harwick doesn't like being defied, and Crenshaw has friends in high places. I know. Watch your back, and watch those children. Hawkins's gaze moved to the 7 faces still watching from across the room. They're lucky to have you. Not everyone would have done what you did. Not everyone saw what I saw. Hawkins nodded slowly. I'll do what I can on my end. File a favorable report. But you need to get those papers properly approved. The sooner the better. I'll ride to Laramie tomorrow. Good. He tipped his hat. Good luck, Mr. Thornton. Then he was gone. The moment the door closed, Billy let out an explosive breath. I thought they were going to take us. I really thought... They're not taking anyone, Elijah said firmly. Not today. Not ever. You can't promise that, Grace said quietly. You heard her. This isn't over. No, it's not. Elijah looked at each of them in turn. But I meant what I said. I'll fight for you, every single one of you, as long as I have breath in my body. Why? Sam's rusty voice cut through the room. Everyone turned to stare at him. Even Grace looked shocked. Sam, speaking twice in 1 week, was unprecedented. Why what? Elijah asked. Why fight so hard? We're not your blood. We're not your responsibility. You could walk away, live your life in peace. Why don't you? It was the question that had been hanging over them since the beginning. The question none of them had dared to ask so directly. Elijah considered it carefully. Because I spent 4 months after my wife died wanting to follow her, he said finally. 4 months of darkness so complete I couldn't see any reason to keep going. And then I walked onto that platform and saw 7 children who'd been told they had no value, no worth, no future. And I thought, if I can give them what they deserve, if I can prove that the world was wrong about them, then maybe my life still means something. He paused, his throat tight. You didn't save me because I saved you. You saved me just by existing, by giving me something to fight for when I'd forgotten how. So don't ask me why I'm doing this. You're the answer. Silence. Then Abby broke away from the group and ran to him, throwing her small arms around his legs. One by one, the others followed. Billy crashing into him with characteristic force. Hannah with quiet tears on her cheeks. Maddie with solemn acceptance. Lucy came last, hesitant and trembling. She stopped a few feet away, her huge eyes locked on his face. Elijah crouched down to her level. It's okay, Lucy. You don't have to... She launched herself at him, burying her face in his shoulder. And then, so softly he almost missed it, she spoke. Papa. One word, the first word she'd said in who knew how long. Elijah held her tight, tears streaming down his face, surrounded by 6 other children who'd chosen him just as surely as he'd chosen them. Grace stood apart, watching, the last holdout, the one who'd learned too well that hope was a weapon that could be turned against you. Elijah met her eyes over the tangle of small bodies. I know you can't trust yet, he said. I know it's too soon. But I'll wait, however long it takes. Grace's composure cracked, just a little, just enough. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe you really are different. Maybe I am. She didn't join the embrace, but she didn't leave either. And for now, that was enough. The ride to Laramie took 2 days through bitter cold and treacherous trails. Elijah left before dawn, Tom Walker's promise to check on the children ringing in his ears. Grace had stood on the porch watching him go, her face unreadable. The younger ones clustered behind her like chicks around a hen. "Come back," Abby had called out, her small voice carrying across the frozen air. "Promise you'll come back." "I promise, sweetheart. 3 days, 4 at most." But promises were fragile things, and Elijah knew better than anyone how easily they could shatter. The territorial court in Laramie was a grim building that smelled of old paper and stale tobacco. Elijah spent his first day navigating the maze of clerks and officials, each one pointing him to someone else, each one requiring different forms and signatures and fees. By the second day, he'd finally reached Judge Cornelius Blackwood's office. The judge was older than Elijah expected, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He reviewed the guardianship papers in silence, his expression giving nothing away. 7 children, Blackwood said finally. "That's ambitious, Mr. Thornton." "It's necessary, Your Honor. Necessary." The judge set down the papers. "Mrs. Harwick of the Children's Aid Society has filed a formal objection to your petition. She claims you're unfit to care for these children, that you have a history of violence, that you've bypassed proper procedures." "I served in the war, Your Honor. The violence was in defense of my country. As for procedures, I filed papers the day after I took the children in. I've done everything by the book." "She also claims you've been coaching the children, teaching them what to say to investigators." Elijah felt his jaw tighten. "That's a lie." "Perhaps, but it's a lie that carries weight when it comes from an official representative of a respected organization." Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "I've read Deputy Marshal Hawkins's report. He speaks well of you, says the children are healthy and cared for. But I've also received a letter from Silas Crenshaw. Crenshaw has his own interests in this matter. I'm aware. He wants 2 of the boys for his mining operation. Offered to make a substantial donation to the Territorial Orphan Fund if I ruled in his favor." Elijah's blood ran cold. "You can't." "I can't be bought, Mr. Thornton. That's what I'm telling you." Blackwood's voice hardened. "Crenshaw made a mistake thinking otherwise. I've been a judge for 30 years. I've seen men like him come and go. They always think money can solve everything." "Then you'll approve the guardianship?" "I'll approve it." Blackwood pulled out a seal and pressed it firmly onto the papers. "Conditionally. You have 6 months to prove this arrangement is working. During that time, you'll receive quarterly visits from a court-appointed inspector. If any concerns arise, the matter will be revisited." "I understand." "I hope you do, Mr. Thornton, because those children have already been failed by every adult in their lives. If you fail them too, the consequences won't just be legal. They'll be human." Elijah took the sealed papers with hands that trembled slightly. "I won't fail them, Your Honor." "See that you don't." The ride back felt longer than the ride out. Exhaustion and relief warring in Elijah's chest. He pushed Rust as fast as he dared, the sealed papers tucked safely inside his coat, his mind already back at the ranch with his children. His children. When had he started thinking of them that way? When had it stopped being an obligation and become the truest thing he knew? He crested the final ridge as the sun was setting on the 3rd day, expecting to see lamplight glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Instead, he saw darkness, and standing in the yard, illuminated by torchlight, was Silas Crenshaw. With him were a dozen men. Some Elijah recognized, ranch hands from Crenshaw's spread. Others were strangers, hard-faced men with guns on their hips and cruelty in their eyes. And in the center of them all, huddled together in the cold, were the children. Grace stood at the front, her lip bleeding, her arms spread wide in the protective stance Elijah had seen on the platform 3 weeks ago. Behind her, the others pressed close, Sam's face a mask of barely controlled rage, Billy trembling with fury, Hannah clutching Maddie and Lucy and Abby like she could shield them with nothing but her body. Elijah's vision went red. He drew his revolver and spurred Rust forward, the horse's hooves thundering across the frozen ground. The men scattered at his approach, but Crenshaw held his position, that oily smile spreading across his face. "Ah, Mr. Thornton. We were just keeping your little family company while we waited for you. Get away from them." Elijah's voice was death itself. Now, there's no need for hostility. We're all civilized men here. I said get away from them. Crenshaw's smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, while you were gone, I received some very interesting information. It seems one of your children, the silent one, Sam, is wanted for questioning in connection with a murder in Kansas City." The world stopped. Elijah looked at Sam. The boy's face had gone white, his composure cracking for the first time since Elijah had known him. "That's a lie," Grace spat. "Is it?" Crenshaw pulled a paper from his coat. "I have here a warrant for the arrest of Samuel James Whitmore, age 12, wanted for questioning in the death of Marcus Whitmore, his father." The silence that followed was absolute. Sam's father. The man Grace had said Sam watched die. The man whose death had stolen Sam's voice. "You're twisting the truth," Elijah said, his gun still trained on Crenshaw. "That boy didn't kill anyone. The warrant says otherwise, and until the matter is settled, I'm authorized to take him into custody." Crenshaw's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Of course, if you were to reconsider my earlier offer, if you were to release the children into my care voluntarily, I might be persuaded to lose this warrant. Accidents happen, after all. Papers get misplaced." "You son of a—" "Careful, Mr. Thornton. There are impressionable young minds present." Elijah's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One shot, and Crenshaw would never threaten his family again. But that would make him a murderer, would leave the children without a protector, would prove every terrible thing Mrs. Harwick had said about him. He lowered the gun. Crenshaw's smile widened. "A wise choice. Now, shall we discuss terms?" "No." The voice came from behind Elijah. He turned to see Tom Walker riding up, badge glinting in the torchlight, followed by Deputy Marshal Hawkins and 4 other men. "This ranch is under territorial protection," Hawkins announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "Mr. Thornton's guardianship has been approved by Judge Blackwood himself. Any attempt to remove these children without proper legal process will be considered kidnapping." Crenshaw's face twisted with rage. "That warrant is 3 years old and has already been dismissed by the Kansas City court." Hawkins held up a telegram. "I checked. The boy was questioned and cleared. His father was killed by debt collectors when Samuel was 10 years old. The boy tried to intervene and was nearly killed himself. He's not a suspect. He's a victim." Elijah felt the world tilt. He looked at Sam, at this child who'd been carrying that weight alone for so long, who'd watched his father murdered and been blamed for it, who'd lost his voice to trauma so deep it might never fully heal. "You knew," he said to Crenshaw. "You knew that warrant was invalid. You used it anyway." "I used what tools were available to me. You used a child's worst nightmare as a weapon." Elijah stepped forward, and something in his face made Crenshaw's men back away. "You dug up the worst thing that ever happened to him and threw it in his face in front of his family. For what? Land? Money? Power?" "I'm a businessman, Thornton. I do what's necessary." "You're a monster, and I swear to God, if you ever come near these children again, I will end you, law or no law." Consequences or no consequences. I will end you. Crenshaw's smile finally faltered. He looked at the men around him, at Hawkins and Walker and the others, and saw no support. Just cold judgment. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is."
Hawkins stepped forward. "Mr. Crenshaw, I am placing you under arrest for attempted kidnapping, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Crenshaw sputtering protests, his men melting away into the darkness. The official process of arrest and documentation playing out in the cold night air. But Elijah wasn't watching any of it. He was on his knees in the frozen dirt, surrounded by 7 children who clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to wash them away. "You came back," Abby sobbed into his shoulder. "You came back, you came back, you came back." "I told you I would, sweetheart. I promised." "He said you weren't coming. The mean man. He said you'd left us like everyone else." He lied. Elijah pulled back to look at each of them, checking for injuries, for trauma, for breaks in the spirits he'd worked so hard to mend. "I will never leave you. Do you understand? Never." Grace stood apart, her arms wrapped around herself, her bleeding lip trembling. She looked younger than she had in weeks, more vulnerable, more afraid. "Grace." She shook her head, not meeting his eyes. "I couldn't stop them. I tried, I fought, but there were too many and they—" Her voice broke. "They just walked right in, like we were nothing, like everything we'd built was nothing." Elijah stood and crossed to her. He took her face in his hands, gentle, despite the rage still burning in his chest. "You protected them. You stood between those men and your family, knowing you couldn't win, and you fought anyway. That's not nothing, Grace. That's everything." "I was so scared. I'm always so scared. I have to be strong for them. But I'm so tired of being scared." "Then let me be scared for you sometimes. Let me carry that weight. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to stop being the one who holds everything together. You learn, day by day, the same way I'm learning to be a father." Elijah wiped the blood from her lip with his thumb. "You're 14 years old, Grace. You shouldn't have had to grow up so fast. But you did. And now it's time to let yourself be a child again, even just a little." She stared at him, her defenses crumbling. And then, for the first time since he'd met her, Grace Whitmore let herself cry. Not the controlled tears of someone managing their emotions, not the silent weeping of someone afraid to be heard. Real tears, loud and messy and raw. The grief of a child who'd been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. Elijah pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed. The other children gathered around, forming a protective circle, the same way they'd circled around each other on that platform. But different now, stronger, united not just by shared trauma, but by shared love. "I've got you," Elijah murmured into Grace's hair. "I've got all of you. You're safe now. You're home." Later, after the lawmen had left and the children had been fed and warmed and tucked into bed, Elijah sat alone in the kitchen with Sam. The boy had been silent since the confrontation. Not the watchful silence of before, but a heavy, wounded silence that filled the room like smoke. "You don't have to talk," Elijah said, "but I want you to know something. What happened to your father wasn't your fault. Not then, not now, not ever." Sam's hands clenched on the table. "I've seen men die, Sam. In the war, after the war. I've seen death up close, and I know what it does to the people left behind. The guilt, the wondering if you could have done something different, if you'd been faster, stronger, braver." A muscle jumped in Sam's jaw. "The answer is no.
There's nothing you could have done. You were a child, facing grown men with weapons. The fact that you tried to save him, the fact that you survived, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to honor. I couldn't protect him, Sam's voice cracked, rusty and broken. I watched them hurt him, and I couldn't do anything.
You were 10 years old. I should have been able to stop them.
Sam, Elijah leaned forward. If you'd been able to stop them, you'd be dead. Your father knew that. That's why he wanted you to run. That's why he fought. Not to save himself, but to give you time to escape.
How do you know that?
Because it's what any father would do. Elijah's voice roughened. It's what I would do, for any of you. Sam stared at him, the walls behind his eyes beginning to crack.
I've been angry for so long, he whispered. At the men who killed him. At myself for being too weak. At God for letting it happen. I've been so angry I couldn't even speak. The words just stopped.
And now?
Now I don't know. I'm still angry. But I'm tired, too. Tired of being silent. Tired of being alone with it.
You're not alone anymore, Sam. You haven't been since you stepped off that train.
I know.
Sam's eyes welled with tears he'd been holding back for years.
That's the part I can't figure out. Why you? Why now? Why would you want a broken kid who can't even talk? Because you're not broken. You're wounded. There's a difference. Elijah reached across the table and gripped Sam's shoulder. Broken things get thrown away. Wounded things get healed. And healing takes time and patience and someone who gives a damn. I give a damn, Sam. About you, about all of them. And I'm not going anywhere. Sam's composure finally shattered. He lurched forward, and Elijah caught him, holding the boy as 12 years of grief and rage and terror came pouring out in harsh, gasping sobs. I miss him, Sam choked out. I miss my dad so much. I know, son. I know. They stayed that way for a long time, the fire crackling softly, the wind whispering outside. A man who'd lost his wife, and a boy who'd lost his father, finding in each other something neither had expected to find again. Family. The next morning dawned clear and cold, winter sunlight streaming through windows Grace had finally allowed to be opened. Elijah stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the children emerge from the house one by one. Billy, already bouncing with energy, raced toward the barn to check on the horses. Hannah followed at a more sedate pace, Maddie beside her, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Abby burst through the door and launched herself at his legs. "Morning, Papa!" Papa. She'd started calling him that after the confrontation with Crenshaw, and the word still made his chest ache in the best possible way. "Morning, sweetheart." Lucy came next, moving slowly, her huge eyes still wary. But she paused beside Elijah, reached up, and touched his hand. "Morning," she said softly. It was only her second word in 3 weeks, but it landed like a benediction. "Good morning, Lucy." Sam emerged last, looking exhausted, but somehow lighter. He nodded at Elijah, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them, and headed for the barn. Only Grace remained inside. Elijah found her in the kitchen, standing at the window, staring out at nothing in particular. "You should eat," he said. "Not hungry." "Grace?" "I've been thinking." She turned to face him, and her expression was different than he'd ever seen it. Open, vulnerable, young. "About what you said last night. About letting myself be a child again. And I don't know if I can. I don't know if there's enough of that left in me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But I want to try. If you'll help me, I'll help you." Elijah crossed to her and put his hands on her shoulders. "Whatever you need,
however long it takes. Even if I push you away, even if I test you and doubt you and make everything harder than it needs to be, especially then." Grace's eyes welled with tears.
Why? Why would you put up with that?
Because that's what parents do. They put up with the hard parts, because the good parts are worth it. He smiled gently. And Grace, the good parts are really, really worth it. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him.
"Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us."
Never. Elijah held her tight, this fierce, wounded girl who'd been carrying the weight of the world since long before she should have had to. Never, Grace. You're my daughter now. All of you are my children. And family doesn't give up. They stood there in the morning light, the sounds of the other children drifting in from outside. Billy's laughter, Hannah's gentle voice, Abby's excited chatter. The sounds of a family being born. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, creeping across the frozen land like a promise that had almost been forgotten. Elijah stood at Sarah's grave on the first truly warm morning, the children scattered across the property behind him. He could hear Billy's laughter from the barn, Hannah's gentle voice singing as she worked in the garden, the younger ones playing some game that involved a lot of running and shrieking. "You should see them now," he said quietly to the headstone. "They're different. Stronger. Happier." Grace smiled yesterday. Really smiled. Not the fake one she uses when she's trying to hold everything together. And Sam told a joke at supper. A joke, Sarah. The boy who didn't speak for 2 years told a joke. And everyone laughed, and he looked so surprised, like he'd forgotten he could make people happy. The wind stirred the new grass around the grave, carrying the scent of wildflowers just beginning to bloom. "I wish you could meet them. Abby especially. She looks so much like Emily. But she's got your spirit, that stubborn, beautiful, never-give-up spirit. She asked me yesterday if you're watching from heaven. I told her yes. I hope I wasn't lying." He knelt down and touched the cold stone. "I'm doing my best, Sarah. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I'm the father these children deserve. But I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying. And I think maybe that's what you'd want. Not perfection. Just effort. Just love." "Papa?" He turned to find Abby standing a few feet away, her golden hair catching the morning light, her ragged doll dangling from one hand. "Hey, sweetheart." "Are you talking to the pretty lady?" "Yeah, I was telling her about you." Abby moved closer, her small face serious. "What did you tell her?" "That you're brave and kind, and you make me smile every single day." "Did she say anything back?" Elijah smiled. That ache in his chest that was becoming so familiar. Grief and love tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them anymore. "She said she's proud of you, and she's glad you found your way home." Abby considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I'm glad she's glad." She held out her free hand. "Hannah says breakfast is ready. She made biscuits, the good kind with honey." Elijah took her hand and let her lead him away from the grave, back toward the house where 6 other children were waiting, back toward the life he'd built from the ashes of everything he'd lost. The court inspector came in late April, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Crawford, who had clearly seen too much suffering to be easily impressed. She spent 3 days at the ranch, observing everything. Meals, chores, lessons, the way the children interacted with each other and with Elijah. She asked questions, hundreds of them, and took notes in a small leather book that never left her hand. On the evening of the 3rd day, she sat down with Elijah in the kitchen while the children played outside. "I've seen a lot of situations like this, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice neutral. "Single men taking in orphans. Sometimes it works,
More often, it doesn't.
And what's your assessment of this situation, Mrs.
Crawford was quiet for a moment, her pen tapping against her notebook. "I've never seen anything quite like what you've built here," she said finally. "Those children, they're not just surviving, they're thriving. The older girl, Grace, she actually laughed during my interview. Her file says she hasn't laughed in 3 years. She's learning she doesn't have to carry everything alone." "So I observed." Mrs. Crawford closed her notebook. "The silent boy spoke to me. Voluntarily. He told me about the chess piece he gave you. Said it was the most important thing he owned, and he trusted you with it." Elijah's throat tightened. "Sam's come a long way." "They all have. The young one who was mute, Lucy, she called you Papa in front of me. Twice." Mrs. Crawford's professional mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing something that might have been wonder. "Do you understand how remarkable that is? That child was diagnosed as permanently nonverbal. The trauma was considered irreversible. She just needed to feel safe. She needed more than that, Mr. Thornton. She needed to believe that someone would catch her if she fell. That's not something you can fake. Children know the difference." "So what happens now, with the inspection?" Mrs. Crawford stood, tucking her notebook into her bag. "I'll file my report with Judge Blackwood. I'll recommend that the conditional period be waived and full permanent guardianship be granted immediately." Elijah's heart stuttered. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about children's welfare, Mr. Thornton." She extended her hand, and he shook it. "You've done something extraordinary here. I hope you know that." "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just loved them." "Yes," Mrs. Crawford smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "That's exactly what I mean." The letter from Judge Blackwood arrived 2 weeks later. Elijah read it 3 times before he trusted himself to speak. Then he gathered the children in the living room, his hands trembling, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. "What's wrong?" Grace asked immediately, her old wariness surfacing. "What happened?" "Nothing's wrong." Elijah held up the letter. "This is from Judge Blackwood, the court." 7 faces went pale. Billy stepped closer to Sam. Hannah pulled Maddie and Lucy against her sides. Abby's grip on her doll tightened. "He says..." Elijah's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "He says the conditional period has been waived. He says Mrs. Crawford's report was the most positive she's ever filed in 20 years of inspections. He says..." "What?" Grace whispered. "What does he say?" Elijah looked up at his children, because that's what they were now, officially and forever, and felt tears spilling down his cheeks. "He says, you're mine. Legally. Permanently. Irrevocably mine. All of you. The adoption is final. No one can ever take you away again." Silence. Then Abby let out a shriek of joy and launched herself at him. Billy followed a second later. Then Hannah. Then Maddie. Lucy came more slowly, but she came, wrapping her thin arms around his waist with surprising strength. Sam stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. "You mean, we're really..." "You're really my children, Sam, in every way that matters." The boy's composure shattered. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and threw his arms around Elijah, holding on like he was afraid to let go. Only Grace remained apart, standing by the window, her face unreadable. Elijah gently disentangled himself from the others and crossed to her. "Grace? I don't..." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to feel. I've wanted this so badly for so long. A real family, a real home. But I was so sure it would never happen. I was so sure." "That someone would take it away?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face.
No one's taking anything away, Elijah said firmly. Not now, not ever. This is your home, Grace. You're my daughter. And nothing is going to change that. Grace looked at him, all her walls finally crumbling.
Papa,
she whispered. It was the first time she'd called him that. Elijah pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed. 16-year-old Grace, who'd been a mother to 6 children before she was old enough to be one. Fierce Grace, who'd fought grown men to protect her family. Wounded Grace, who'd finally allowed herself to be someone's child again.
I've got you, he murmured. I've got all of you. Forever.
That night, after the celebrations had wound down and the younger children had been put to bed, Elijah sat on the porch with Grace and Sam, watching the stars come out.
What happens now?
Sam asked quietly. What do you mean?
I mean, we're a family now, officially. So what happens next? What does our life look like?
Elijah considered the question. I suppose it looks like this. Working the ranch together. Learning and growing together. Having good days and bad days, but facing them together.
That's it?
Grace sounded almost disappointed. Just normal life? Normal life is a gift, Grace. Trust me. After everything we've all been through, normal is the greatest blessing we could ask for. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I guess I never really knew what normal felt like. Not since I was little. Then we'll figure it out together, all of us. Sam leaned back, his face tilted toward the sky. The stars look different now. Different how? I don't know. Less cold, maybe. Less far away. He glanced at Elijah. That probably sounds stupid. No, it doesn't. I know exactly what you mean. They sat in comfortable silence, 3 wounded souls who'd found their way to each other through tragedy and chance and something that might have been grace. Papa? Grace's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Yeah? Thank you for not walking past us on that platform, for seeing us when everyone else looked away. I should be thanking you. You saved my life, Grace. All of you did. I was drowning before you came. You gave me a reason to swim. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and possibility. The ranch had never looked better. Fences mended, barn repainted, Sarah's garden blooming with flowers that Hannah and Maddie tended with devoted care. The children had grown into their roles. Billy with the horses, Sam with the cattle, Grace managing the household with quiet efficiency. And Lucy, who had been silent for so long, was talking now. Not constantly, not easily, but talking. Her voice was like a small bird learning to sing, tentative and precious. One evening, as the family gathered for supper, she climbed into Elijah's lap and looked up at him with those huge gray eyes.
Papa? Yes, sweetheart? You know what I like best about being here?
What's that?
Nobody calls us names anymore.
Lucy's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held depths of remembered pain.
Nobody puts papers on our coats. Nobody looks at us like we're bad.
Elijah felt his throat tighten. That's because you're not bad, Lucy. You never were.
I know that now.
She smiled, a real smile, bright and trusting. You taught me. After supper, the older children took the younger ones outside to catch fireflies, their laughter drifting through the warm evening air. Elijah stayed behind, washing dishes, when Grace appeared beside him.
Let me help.
You don't have to.
I want to.
She picked up a towel and began drying the plates he handed her.
I've been thinking about what you said, about normal life being a gift.
And?
You were right. This, all of this, it's everything I ever wanted. A home, a family.
People who care about me not because they have to, but because they choose to. She paused. I didn't think places like this existed. They don't. Elijah handed her another plate. Not by themselves. They have to be built. By people who refuse to accept that the world has to be cruel. Is that why you took us in? To prove the world doesn't have to be cruel? Partly. But mostly I took you in because I saw 7 children who deserved better than what they'd been given.
And I had better to give. Grace was quiet for a moment, working through something in her mind. Then she said, I want to help other kids, someday. Kids like us, who've been thrown away. I want to show them that it doesn't have to be the end of their story. Elijah looked at her, this fierce, brave girl who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. That's a good dream, Grace. You think I could do it? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. And I think any child who finds their way to you will be the luckiest kid in the world. Grace's eyes welled with tears, but she was smiling. You really believe that? I really do. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder the way a daughter might rest against her father. And Elijah felt the last broken piece of his heart finally click into place. Fall came with golden leaves and crisp mornings, and the anniversary of the day Elijah had found them on the platform. He woke early, as he always did. But instead of going straight to work, he walked to Sarah's grave. The children found him there an hour later, all 7 of them, standing in a solemn row. We wanted to come too, Billy explained, to say thank you. Thank you? To Mrs. Sarah. Abby stepped forward, clutching a handful of wildflowers. For sending you to find us. Maddie says she must have asked God to help, and God sent you. That's what I believe, Maddie confirmed, her dark eyes serious. The Lord works through people. He worked through you. One by one, the children approached the grave. Abby laid her flowers down with solemn care. Billy placed a small wooden horse he'd carved himself. Hannah contributed a ribbon from her hair. Maddie recited a prayer. Lucy whispered something too quiet to hear. Sam laid down his father's chess piece, the one he'd given to Elijah, then took it back with a small shake of his head, not ready to let it go completely. Grace went last. She knelt beside the headstone and placed her hand on the cold marble. I never met you, she said softly, but I know you must have been something special. Because the man you loved, he saved us, all of us. He gave us a home and a family and a future. She paused, her voice thick. I promise I'll take care of him, the way he takes care of us. I'll make sure he's never alone again. Elijah's vision blurred with tears. When Grace stood, she walked directly to him and took his hand. The other children gathered close, forming a circle around the grave, around Sarah's memory and Elijah's grief, and the family they'd built together from the wreckage of their separate sorrows. We should do this every year, Hannah said. Come here together. Remember. Yes, Elijah agreed, his voice rough. We should. They walked back to the house as a family, the morning sun warming their backs, the future stretching out before them, full of possibility. That evening, Elijah gathered them all in the living room. The fire crackled in the hearth. The curtains, Sarah's curtains, were open for the first time in a year, letting in the golden light of sunset. I want to tell you something, he said. All of you. 7 faces turned toward him, attentive and trusting. A year ago, I was alone in this house, drowning in grief. I'd lost my wife, my hope, my reason to keep going. I thought my life was over. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. Then I walked onto that platform and saw 7 children wearing labels that told lies about who they were. And something inside me, something I thought had died with Sarah, woke up. You saved us, Billy said. No, Elijah shook his head firmly. You saved me, every single one of you.
by needing me, by trusting me, by giving me a reason to wake up in the morning. His voice cracked. I thought I was rescuing orphans, but the truth is, I was the orphan. I was the one who was lost, and you found me. Silence fell over the room. Then Abby climbed into his lap, as she always did, and pressed her small hand against his chest. Your heart isn't sad anymore, Papa. I can feel it. No, sweetheart. It's not sad anymore. Elijah pulled her close, opening his arms to include the others as they gathered around him. It's full. For the first time in a long time, my heart is completely full. They stayed that way as the sun set and the stars came out. A man who'd lost everything, and 7 children who'd been told they were nothing, holding on to each other in a house that had become a home. The labels were long gone, crumpled and scattered by the wind on a cold December platform. But what they built in their place would last forever. Elijah looked at his children, at Grace's fierce devotion, Sam's quiet strength, Hannah's gentle spirit, Billy's wild joy, Maddie's old soul, Lucy's fragile trust, Abby's shining love, and knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Not alone, not empty, not drowning in grief, but here, with them. A family forged not by blood, but by choice. Not by obligation, but by love. The wind still howled outside, as it always did in Wyoming. The world was still hard and cold, and full of people who would rather label children than love them. But inside this house, there was warmth. There was light. There was laughter and tears and the messy, beautiful chaos of 7 children learning to trust, and 1 man learning to live again. They had found each other when they needed it most. They had chosen each other when the world said they were worthless, and they had built something together that no one could ever take away. Because in the end, the labels didn't matter. The past didn't matter. The cruelty of strangers and the judgment of society, none of it mattered. What mattered was this moment, this family, this love. What mattered was that 7 children who had been called unwanted were wanted now, completely and forever. What mattered was that a broken man had found his reason to live, and 7 lost children had found their way home. They were Thorntons now, all of them, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, and that was everything.